recording has started. I think good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. This is the first session which we are going to start on the automation training. So we would go with the initial introduction for the automation, and we will cover the basic introduction and then out of the box content, and then how to build a workflow, simple workflow, and then what are the components involved in building the workflow, what are the prerequisites to build the workflow, and then how we can execute them or integrate with Luma. We would just walk through that session, and then in the next one where we will be trying to build a complex workflow including conditions, error handling, and then error boundary, all those configuration we will see it in the session 2. Then in the third session where we will be building your own content, that means you will create apps and then operations and other options we can try and then see creating them to integrate with the Luma. Then session 4 would be deployment related discussion where we will show how on-premise, SaaS, and hybrid different types of architecture we can deploy the Luma automation. And then we'll talk about the roadmap items. What are the new features which would be coming up in the automation component. So this is a high level agenda which we are going to cover in this phase of automation training. Let's get started with the introduction. So in this session, we're going to talk about the intro to the Serviceaide automation component, then key components of the automation. We will touch upon the workflow designer, and then we'll create an example of the workflow, and then we can plan for some assignments later. Okay. Let's get started. Introduction. Service-aide automation allows you to orchestrate tasks on remote services. It can be server, application, and then it can be on various different REST-based or SOAP-based integrations. So we also cover, it will also support BAPMN module, that means business process modeling notation, which is standard in the automation field. So that would be easy way to notify or easy way to integrate or build a process or build a flow using this BPMN notations. So BPMN based workflow designer can be used to automate complex business process to your organization specific needs. So that's what BPMN tool or BPMN based automation tool would support us to do. Then key features of this automation tool is to easy designer that doesn't need special technical expertise. You don't need to understand Java. You don't need to understand the coding language. It would be based on drag and drop the operations and other connection points. The controls for the workflow can be just drag and drop to the canvas where we will build the workflow. It is simple to build the designer using the designer. Then can automate or orchestrate end-to-end business process that integrate with multiple endpoints. Executes process asynchronously. Currently, we are it's supported only the asynchronous way of integration. That means you do a fire and forget the APIs, and then that would come back and then update the workflow or the system on a different way. We're not planning to start with the synchronous way where the process would wait for the user to complete. So that would be in the upcoming feature in the future releases. We are planning for those the user tasks. That's what they call it in the BPMN terminology. So we will address that in the future. But currently we are going to have this process to run asynchronously. Can integrate with multiple systems. not just limited to that allows web services. That means it's not dependent only on REST or SOAP-based services. We can integrate with PowerShell, for example, in case if I want to do perform on-premise AD Active Directory jobs like add user, create end user, enable AD user, disable AD user, all AD Active Directory related one. Active Directory means the on-premise Active Directory. Still, a lot of companies, organizations have them in their on-premise, which is not exposed as a REST or a SOAP-based interface. So in those scenarios, we do use the PowerShell connectors and SSH connectors to perform all those activities. So that's the reason it's not limited to only the REST and SOAP-based services. So we will be integrated using the normal PowerShell and other commands, which is more powerful in terms of on-premise connectivity. Can be executed via multiple systems because we expose a REST interface for the automation, which would go get the list of workflows, get the list of all the parameters required for the workflow to run, and also execute or trigger the workflow from API. So it can be easily integrated with any ITSM system. So currently we have done it with Luma Virtual Agent. Soon we will be having this integration available in other ITSM systems like POP, ChangeGear, and ISM. So workflow designer, let us see what are the information, what are the things available in the workflow designer. So workflow designer is a visual depiction of the steps involved in the workflow. It can have a start and an end in between multiple tasks. The tasks can be script task, service task, or the conditions and other options or other controls which we have to connect the data from one system to the other system. So user-friendly interface that gives business analysts or workflow developers to build the workflow, which is like the easily understandable notations. That's where the BPMN comes in handy. So it can orchestrate, automate, deploy complex business process easily with the designer. So we have talked about the designer. We have seen, let us see the key components for the workflow. So the key components are the applications. So the applications here, we term it as apps and instances. Apps is what we call it as consolidated operations. For example, in case if I call an Active Directory app, that means that app would contain a list of operations which are associated with Active Directory, be it like create user, enable user, disable user, unlock user. All those Active Directory related operations are consolidated and then we call it as an apps. And then instances, what we call instances is like similar terminology which we use even in Luma, where in these apps would run on which specific instance, because you would build one app and then you can run it in multiple instances. That means you can have them run on staging, you can run them on production. So that's where we will be able to build one's app and then use it in multiple places. So that's where the instances come into picture, come into handy there. Then we also have operations. So these operations have nothing but integration types, two different types of integrations to build the operations we do have. One is mule connectors. So the most of the PowerShell or SSH shell script based the integrations are built using the MuleSoft. So that's where the power comes into this particular automation tool, because the connectors which MuleSoft offers, we can use them and then build the workflow using those connectors. That's where the connector list for the automation would be too big. So you can handle n number of integrations using this connector component. So that is one option where in case if you have built a mule workflow, you can export them and import them over here, which would come in handy. And also you can also, if it is customer is looking for having a REST based integration, so you can build your own operations using the REST connector integration type as REST. So we will walk through that in the upcoming training sessions where we'll go and create new connectors, both the Mule and as well as the REST in the third session or later. And then we also have the ability to workflow trigger. That's one of the key components where how the workflow would be triggered. So you create a workflow, design the workflow, test the workflow, and then you need to deploy the workflow and then trigger that workflow. So that's where the integration system like Luma, VA, and other integration system we can build to trigger the workflow there. And then along with the triggering the workflow, we also need to supply the inputs required for that particular workflow. So you would pass all the required information along with the payload to trigger a particular workflow. That's where the integration systems, integrated systems like Luma, VA, and other things will be integrated later. So, and we also have the ability to have conditions and then BPM and tasks like service task and script task to create and build the workflow. And then conditions and error boundary events would help in decision points, will help in navigating the workflow or creating the flow as per the need of the organization. So these are the key components for the workflow. Then to what is required to build a workflow. So to building a workflow, what is mainly required would be the identify the prerequisites. For example, take an example, if I want to go and create a new user in the Active Directory, what would be required to create new user and what are the different steps which it might cast? What are the tasks which would be required for that? What are the inputs and output parameters or attributes required for that particular workflow? Like simple add user, I would need the user's detail, like what is his full name, what is his first name, last name, email address, and then his role, designation, location. All those details I would need. That means that needs to be captured to create a user. So I will have to list out all the attributes which are required, input parameters which are required for me to prompt the user or get that information either from the corresponding system from where we are triggering this particular workflow. We can probably feed the inputs from there to the automation, or we can have the information available to create that. For example, in case if I want to create a username, which is combination of your first name, last name, or something like that. So you can build that using the automation triggers or similar to that what we have in the Luma. We can use the random functions to create them. Similarly, we do have in the automation to create those constants. So that is one thing. We will list out all the required information, what is required for a particular workflow, design the workflow before putting it in before you start in the design. Probably it will be better to have them in some piece of paper or some piece system where you would know what are the steps required for that. For example, I will prompt all this information. I will get all the username, last name, first name to create a user, and also the tasks required for that. For example, what is required? I need to go and check whether this user exists in the system, and then I will have that step required to validate whether the user exists in the system. If exists, what need to be done? I will have to literally design the flow. What are the steps required? What are the tasks required for me to fulfill the creation of the user in the system? So after creation of the for design the workflow, what you would be doing is test that particular workflow, and they in using the automation tool itself, you have the ability to test which prompts for the attributes which are required, and then key in them and then see if it works fine. And then trigger the workflow means it will be deploying it in the using the integrate with the Luma or any other third-party tool and trigger from that particular application. So that's the steps required to build a workflow. This is the designer which we would be launching that. We'll be going through that. So this is how the designer would look like. Would have the workflow name. Here create AWS EC2 instance is the name of the workflow. And this is the design controls. We have the start, stop, and then these are the service task, script task, error boundary, and this is the decision box or the gateway where you would have the controls available. So these are the design controls. These are the currently available. Later we will be adding much more design controls available from the BPMN tool, like user tasks are the one of them, and the rest of the other things which should be coming in the upcoming features. But these are the things which using this, you will be able to build the workflow. Even the complex workflows can be built. And then this is a list of apps which I was talking through. These are the different apps which we already have out of the box content to build. This would have a lot of operations in each of them. Let's not waste the time. Let's take a look. Let me log into the system. So this is the system which I'm going to log in. So once I log into the system, I would be able to see the list of workflows which are there. So these are the list of workflows which are there in the system. I'll be able to create new workflow, or I'll be able to run the particular workflow. So this is where we can do the test for the workflow. So where it will prompt for the inputs and then it would run the execute that particular workflow. Before creating building a workflow, let's understand the interface of what are the things are there in this particular app. So workflow builder, this is what you see, the list of workflows, and then you will have the ability to create new workflow and then run the workflows. And this is a workflow execution. In case if you have triggered some workflow, you would be able to see the live execution of that particular workflow, the steps which are there. You will also be able to see the historical execution. So this is the historical execution. If you click on one of the flow, you would see the notation, which path the workflow took. And then here, if you see get user, if the user is there, if it is enabled, this is the flow which we have created. It would start and then get user. That means whatever the input provided by the user, it would run, get the user, and check whether the user is enabled or disabled. So here it's enabled is false. So that means the user is disabled. So we are going to enable user and notify the user. So this is the workflow which we created. We wanted to check whether the user is disabled and then enable that user. If it goes to this path, that means if it is enabled, that means the user is already enabled. It will just go check and then get the notification. If it have gone to this path, if the user is already enabled. If you are already in this flow, we will wanted to show the options what we have here. For example, this is the for debugging or the trace log the operations. So which we wanted to have all the details required for you to trace each and every step. So if you see the trace log, at each and every step, you would see the payload which we have sent to the system and the corresponding response from that particular system. So this would help drastically in performing all the required actions. For example, in case if you know if there is any error while building, you would need to know what are the parameters required, what are the errors which is showing up, because it might be some attribute might be missing, some mandatory fields are not getting passed. So all this information would help in debugging the workflow. This is the first step in while building the workflow. And also you would see the runtime information, what information has been passed as input parameters, what are the input parameters provided, and then you will see the input parameters available here, and then output parameters, they are the parameters which we capture in the workflow. All those things would also be available, and then during the runtime you will be able to see them information so that you can track and debug or see if there are any issues there. So that's more about the historical flows, which you would provide more details of that, how much time it took, and then when it got trigger ID. And this would be required in case if I want to see the logs later, you'll be able to see that information. So that's on the workflow execution. Next step is the integrations. So this integrations is where we will build the what you call as connectors, apps. So this is nothing but the apps. So and then if you see that one, if it's MuleSoft and one agent and 19 operations. So MuleSoft is the integration type. So you would see further down, you would see send email using the REST-based integration type. So that's how it will differentiate between the type of integration. So that's where the connector would come in. In case if you're using REST, then you would have to build completely. In case if I'm going to with Mule, you will have to import them using the importing tool. So that would give all the operations which are exposed in the Mule would show up as operations in this one. Just to show one of the example here. So if you see the AWS EC2, you have all these options or the operations available so that you can use them while creating the workflow. Any questions so far in the apps or the operations? That's where most of the a workflow would be dependent on whether you need the app which are required to build the workflow, and that app should have the operations. So if the listed operations are not sufficient, you will be able to build them, because most of these AWS are Mule related ones or the REST based ones which we have built using the command scripts. So the Active Directory, if you see this Active Directory one, all of them are using the command. So you can go and create your own operation by providing the right format script so that you will be able to create new operations. You don't require to go to Mule to publish that workflow. So that's how we have made the Active Directory or other operations easy to use so that you can build on your own and then expand or extend that operations to whatever the needs for the customer. So that's about the this one, and then we have execution agent. This is what we will cover it in the later. This is a deployment model where we have a hybrid. That means operation that runtime would be on the cloud, and then you do have a component which is called orchestrator at the on-premise end, so that you will have can create one more execution agent. That means you build a workflow using the designer here. Only thing, the endpoint execution would go through that particular agent. So that's where you will have an on-premise orchestrator tool which would connect to this particular instance of the automation. So we'll talk about that later, but this is how the operations and integrations would show up there. And then execution agent, which I already talked through. So we have currently cloud. In case if you create new, that means it will be on-premise agents one. Service configuration. So these are the service configurations, means these are the credentials or the attributes used to run a particular workflow. For example, if you see here, most of our AD related workflows would use this PowerShell configuration. That means you don't require to pass the AD details at the runtime. So you will already have them stored in the service configuration. And then the workflow, whatever we have developed or deployed mule workflows would already have the ability to read these configurations from here. You don't specify that, it will read and then publish them. So it will use this particular configuration and then run the actual Active Directory use cases or other. Similarly, we have other power service configurations, which the MuleSoft connectors have been built reading that particular configuration so that it's not hard coded. So you have the ability to specify or configure at the customer place. And then each of this have got similar to we have what we have it in the Luma, where we can have used the encryption facility to encrypt the passwords and other things and store them. Customer will not have the we will not have the ability to decrypt and then get the password. So that's how it's saved in the system. So that's about the service configuration. And then probably for building the workflow and then taking it forward, I'll ask Shaker to share the screen and then show us to how you build the actual workflow. Shaker, are you ready?
Yeah, thanks, Prasanna. Good morning, good evening to everyone. So today, let me share my screen. Uh, so today we will build a new workflow for enabling the user. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
Shaker.
Okay, thank you. So, so before creating the workflow, uh, as Prasanna said, that we need to get the input parameters in mind and get those information from the user upfront, because once we get that information, we cannot trigger the workflow and then go back and ask the user for any other fields. So the input parameters, whatever we need, it has to be taken upfront before triggering the workflow. User.
So this is the canvas where you would probably drag and drop the things. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Shaker.
Yep. So, uh, so, so before, as I told you, let's so before for enabling the user, the input parameter which is needed, it can be a SAM account or an email address. So it needs to be a unique value. So in this example, let's take that we will ask the user for his SAM account.
So these are the validation parameters. We can
Yes.
have multiple different types of validation, like pattern matching. In case if you are asking user to provide a telephone number, we can probably do the validation for pattern, date, or email. Those things we can have them configured here.
Yeah. Okay. So the workflow input parameter is done. So now let's.
Even there is an hint also to the workflow parameters. What are the required parameters? Once you drag and drop the apps, for example, in this case, we are doing an app using the Active Directory. Select one of the in this one.
Yeah. 1 minute.
Yeah.
Okay, the operation, it displays all the list of operation.
This is the list of operations which are available for that particular app.
Yeah.
So here,
So
if you
I'm,
go to the operations, just go to the operation.
yeah,
So here you would see what are the information available at the dollar, say dollar SAM account name. So that means that is the input required for this particular operation. So you would know what are the input parameters. You can also go to the inputs,
yeah,
go to the input. You would also see this is the input required for this step. So for performing this get user step, I would need them. So that means this SAM account name, I should pass them from the workflow. So I need to go to the workflow. That's what he did that earlier step. So in the workflow step, I would need to have this SAM account name as input parameter need to be passed in. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So, okay. So input parameter, and then I'll do this. So, okay. So let's save the workflow. Yeah. So now it says the mapping for input parameter is not defined in the service task. So this is the service task. So
So
we need to map this SAM account name. From where are we getting this input? So it will be a direct mapping. The source type will be the workflow input parameter, and the input parameter name is SAM account name.
that's right. And one thing to notice here is like assume if you don't have the complete steps, take example like you would have put all those information, just delete the endpoint connection,
Which one, Prasanna?
the end connection, the line connecting to the end,
Okay.
just to show that error. Yeah. So
Okay.
you would not be able to save the workflow, and that means that you need to have a logical conclusion to the workflow which you have built. So unless if it doesn't find any logical conclusion, it will not be able to save. That means there is no end to this particular workflow, so that it will not be saved. So once you drag the connection to the flow, it would allow you to save, and all those UI related validations already been built, and then it will not allow you to save the workflow.
Yeah. Okay. So now let me save it. Uh, so let's just okay. So now I have connected to Active Directory, which was there in the service configuration. So the name of the account is bot, and it's disabled because if you click it, it gives the option to enable the account. So let's just trigger this workflow from here. Okay.
So this is
So
the
now,
user account which we provide. Yeah.
yeah. So now here, if you click on execute and view, it shows the live execution to you. And uh, once you click on the operation, you will get all the details, whether the workflow was triggered successfully, and did you get a response to the to the uh, call which you made. So as you can see, the status code is 0, which means successful, and it is returning the name of the account with all the details in the response. So let's again go back to the workflow. So now we have just got the details of the account. So now we need to check whether that account is disabled or enabled. So to do that, we need to add a gateway. Let's put,
So this way we can be able to build currently what he's taking an input as SAM account name. We can also have an email address because not many would be aware of what the SAM account name for their this one. Email is what they are comfortable. So you can have the input as email, and then get user would do an email get, and then it will capture the SAM account name for the future actions or operations. So
Correct.
that's what we can also plan. That's how most of our out of the box component or out of the box workflow have that workflow configured. So it is just for demonstration purpose. We're just building a simple workflow and then show how easy it is to build a workflow.
Yeah. So now after getting the user details, now the next step is to enable the account. So I'm adding a service task, and we already have the operation for enabling the account. So once you select the operation name, uh, it would populate the operation for you.
So you need to map the attributes here.
Yeah, I'll do that. So now in the input parameter, we have the SAM account name. So now in this get user, we got the output parameter. On success, we have defined the output parameter in the SAM account name. So we will map this SAM account name to that output parameter. Okay. So it would be step output parameter, and the source step is get user, and the name is SAM account name.
So
Okay.
that way we will be able to use the previous execution response from the previous execution step and then use them in the future steps, subsequent steps. So that's the option which we are showing how we can build the workflow.
Okay, so I'm just dragging the end. Okay. And here, true. Okay. So, we go to the
This
end.
is a little bit tricky. We need to
Yeah.
see how we can make it more user friendly. We need to remember the activity for this step with what is activity ID of that particular step, and then what is the response which is coming in from the previous step to get the condition created there.
The activity name that I copied. So this expression is out underscore activity, which is this
This is
name,
the step ID.
which name, yeah, yeah, and underscore enable equals to false.
So that is the output of that particular activity. Just go to that activity and get user activity once again.
Yep.
And then go to the on.
Yeah, the expression. Okay.
Right. The parameters, output parameters to show enabled.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So on success,
Yeah.
we also are capturing the value in the enabled, whether it is true or false.
Yeah, these are the attributes captured on the response for that particular call. So we will be able to reuse them in the subsequent call. So if it is enabled is true, just see, yeah. If it is true, then take this step. If it is false, take the other step. So that's how we will be making the conditions or gateway calls. So currently this gateway call can take one input and three outputs. So we can define them like that. Later, probably next session, we will be showing the other option where using the error boundary events. So that would allow us to take multiple routes based on the conditions. We can build n number connections using that method. So we will see that in the later date. So here we will be showing only the true or false, which is two-step. We can also build another with one more condition, 3 steps. But if it is more steps are involved in a workflow, for example, in case if you want to take uh, uh, these conditions based on the user input category or something like that, where we want it can take multiple routes, we'll be able to build such workflows using that error boundary events, system events.
Okay. Yeah, I think we are good now. Okay, so let me first disable this account here. Okay, it's already disabled. Okay, so now let's go to the Active Directory and check. Okay, bot. Fine now. Yeah, so now the account is enabled. We are getting the disabled option. So we can check the
Rerun
same.
this workflow again.
Yeah,
It should take the other path.
yeah. Yeah.
See that it automatically takes because that enabled already. So it would go and end this one. You can add notification, whatever step you can add multiple steps to that, make it more tasks to that particular workflow.
I should have named it. Okay. So now here you can also add notifications to the VSA. So for doing that, we have our Luma notification operation also built. Let me.
So that's where the out of the box content would help. Most of the required apps are there with the operations so that you can just drag and drop and then create the uh, uh, connections and create the workflow.
So I have already created these Luma notification. So here the operation contains the payload details. So in the payload details, here we need to have this user ID defined and the SAM account defined. So let me add that as an input parameter. And I'll map it to the default. We have we can send it to Luma channel account ID, or we can send it to the initiator contact ID. So, okay, so I'm selecting initiator contact ID. And let me add one more. And we can map it to the get user. In the output, we got the SAM account name from the get user. SAM account name. Okay, save. Okay. User ID. initiator contact ID. Okay. So this notification, it contains the text that we have enabled the user with the bot name.
So even if you want to pass this message to, you can have them captured in some text and then send that as a parameter. We can also do the token for those things too.
Yep. So you can also copy, just select the service task, Control V, and drag it here. Global operations.
Instance in select.
Prasanna, correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's add again these two parameters, which are direct mapping, offline parameter, initiator contact ID, save.
Instead of going through all these steps again, is it possible to copy the other notification you just created and, you know, drag it to where you want?
Not there yet, Ken. I think we need to have those options.
Yeah. Okay.
Copy the task, copy this one. So
In fact, I think we should have it as a global operation and then you can copy it.
right, that's correct. It's the workflow parameter.
It's a source output parameter of get SAM account name. Okay.
Save.
Okay. Anything remaining? Okay. So now let me run this workflow. Okay, so now I should have got the message here. Yeah, we have enabled the user bot in this thing. Let's go and run it again. Okay, the user ID contains. Oh, okay. So since we are sending this to the initiator contact ID, the contact his ID is 1 actually. So I think if we change it, gel. Okay.
That's where the copy would help, or the global operations would help in handling those typos.
Yeah. Okay. And
I think it's getting the same message here too. I can
Yeah.
change the message. Okay.
And oh, okay. Oh, I have put the same message. Let me change
Right.
it.
User is already enabled, something like that. You can put.
Yeah, bot is already enabled. Okay. So yeah, this is how you can design the workflow. It is actually very easy to use. Uh, you just need to I mean, prepare a flow chart of how you need to design it, and then once you start building it, it's not that tough.
Right. I think more than that, I think each of these operations would give that information, what are the parameters which are required, because all of them would have been defined as dollar variables there. So you know those are the inputs which are required. So and then only thing for subsequent steps, that input parameter can be coming in from the previous step, so that we need to handle it. Other than that, I think
Yeah,
so most of the information which is already required will be already defined in the operation in our content. So that way it will be easy to build a workflow. There are still multiple steps. We need to define the input parameters in multiple places, not just the operation step. You also need to define in case if it is that the workflow step. So some of the things which we wanted to handle it, but later we will see what are the ways we can make it easy to build the workflows.
so Prasanna, you want me to execute this from the skill? I did create a skill.
Yeah,
uh,
not execute, at least show the
okay.
from the skill how you
Yeah.
will call the action, and then
Okay.
what are the information it would show me up there.
Yeah. So I just created a test skill so that we can save up on and the time for build and publish. And so here I created the same attribute name at identifier SAM account name, which is needed. And once we have that information, we can invoke the automation workflow designer.
So whatever the workflows which you have already built in the designer would show me up over here so that you can
Yes.
execute them. And if what are the parameters required for that step would also
Yeah.
show up over here so that you can
Yeah.
map them with dollar variables here, input variables or global variables, which we have already captured for the attributes. You can use them to create the flow. So I think
Yeah.
but the important part here is like the APIs have the ability to get the required list of workflows. In each workflow required parameters, which are already defined in the workflow. You will be able to get them and then show them as required fields for the operation to complete.
Yep.
So
So
that's
anyone has any questions?
Can you
that's
run
a
that?
Okay. So oh shit, I should have opened the conversation history. My bad.
it's okay. You will be able to see them later.
Okay, so here, so it's okay. So it got triggered,
Yeah.
and yeah, we got the message. Bot is already enabled.
So that's the intro. I think probably what we would have is like probably we will provide the environment details for you to test it out It would be currently in the QA environment. Later we would be, once we have the release, probably we'll be having them associated to your VA accounts in the LumaStar. Similar to LumaStar, we will have another environment created for operations automation. So for now, I'll provide the details. I think I can plan to create 3 different environments for specific to LATAM 1 and then NEA 2 of them, so that we can have them to play around, create your own, because all the operations which you have mentioned are already available in each of them. We just need to create workflows in case if you get stuck. We will probably see that and then address the questions in the next session. So that way we will be able to get the hands on and also play around with the tool. When you start playing around only, you will be able to understand the flow, create new workflows, and then get more understanding of the product. Any questions? So on the next session, we will start with the questions and answer in case if you get stuck, if you want to handle anything or answer anything. And then we will go with the complex workflows, how we will create the conditions, how we would handle the error boundary events. We will talk about that and then yeah, probably understand more on how do you build a complex workflows. Right, then if no questions, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. We'll connect next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank
Good day.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.